So, after completing our Shashti Murti yesterday, 60th session, wherein we went to the fundamentals, we are continuing the fundamentals today also. We have the same wonderful speaker of yesterday, wherein we traversed up to Article 19. We'll cover the Chapter 3, if possible, today with Mr. Justice Pushpendra Singh Bhati today. We are thankful for the presence of Justice Ramkumar and, of course, Nagamuthu sir. And thank you very much for being part of this journey. And today, I'm sure that we'll enrich ourselves by the fundamentals. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. As Chapter 3, as we were speaking, it is the heart of the transformative spirit of our Constitution. And we completed up to 19. And we saw that how the fight arose between the fundamental rights and the intervention in the fundamental rights by the judiciary or by the legislature became the bone of contention in 60s and 70s in the judiciary and in the precedent law, and that became like a manthan, like Samundar Manthan, where you will find a lot of things coming out, Amrit and Vish and everything. So probably the best thing that came out in the shape of Amrit was, out of the Samundar Manthan, was the case of the Keshwanand Bharti, because we got basic structure, which is the sanctity of which was to be maintained, and which also sort of encouraged us to look into with the perspective that the parliament is a component of governance, like judiciary and like from representing legislature, like judiciary and executive. But actually, the constitution is the axis on which the whole thing, the country has to move. And the basic structure, the best part, that probably the fine, if you really compress it all together, the basic part of the basic structure included 7 components: supremacy of constitution, unity and sovereignty of India, democratic and republic government of India, federal structure of federal character of constitution, secular character of constitution, separation of power, and individual freedom. So to give a gist of what Keshwanand Bharti brought us out was these 7 parameters, which got us into a sort of basic parameter, because there was a debate whether how far the fundamental rights can be amended or breached or suspended or whatever. So this complete phenomena resulted into that this is the basic structure, you normally should not touch that. And then over the time, the legal community, the legal fraternity, over the time included few other parameters in the basic structure, like rule of law, judicial review, parliamentary system, rule of equality, harmony and balance between fundamental rights and directive principles, free and fair elections, limited power of parliament to amend the constitution, Article 32, 136, 142, 147, Article 226, 227. So this list of this room of basic parameter, basic structure, which was given to us out of the churning which happened in all these cases, that really came out, and we have traveled a long way since then, and we have given a definite character to our society, to our country, to our citizen, and that we have tried to move on. So straight away coming to Article 20, the Article 20, in my opinion, has been rightly placed in the Chapter 3, because, and is always it's always an intriguing part for a student of law, because any person would not want a person to be, concept of double jeopardy is a well-established concept, and any kind of trial or any kind of change in law or multiple laws or supplemental laws or complemental laws cannot, the person has to be protected, a citizen has to be protected. We can't subject him to, on the perspective of multiple trials or multiple facets of law, we cannot put him to the risk of taking on for the same act multiple proceedings. To my mind, an interesting question arose when people started asking that if a person is convicted, criminal trial is held, and if a departmental proceeding is held, does it not amount to double jeopardy? So the interesting part was that the or even in other cases, the interesting part was whether this double jeopardy principle will spill over to other proceedings also. For example, in a motor accident case, there is a criminal case of negligence, and there is a compensation for negligence, and so on and so on, so. So the clear answer was that this is a double jeopardy principle is operating particularly for the criminal proceedings. So any other proceedings are separate proceedings, and they cannot be barred on any count. They have to be, other proceedings have to be seen in light of their respective laws. Another bone of contention that came in was that if a person, suppose a detailed departmental inquiry is happening, and a criminal trial is going on. So we all know that in departmental inquiry, there is an examination of witnesses, and there is cross-examination also. We also know that similarly in criminal trial also there is examination and cross-examination. So the jurists had to wrangle it out by finding a way out, because subjecting a person to examination and cross-examination, and then once these are disclosed, then subjecting him to another set of examination and cross-examination would jeopardize the very basic principles of a criminal trial, where the examination and cross-examination has to be free, has to be fair, and has to be absolutely transparent, and it cannot be disclosed at an earlier stage. So we as law fraternity saw a jurisprudence in cases like Captain Paul, in which the Honorable Apex Court said that if it is a complicated question of law and an integrated question of law, and if the facts are so mixed and intermingled, and it is so much on the same point, and it is a very complicated case, suppose it is a case of a very severe crime or a severe nature, then the examination and cross-examination of the departmental inquiry or the other proceedings has to remain stayed, and the criminal proceedings have to be given precedence. And once the criminal trial is over, once the examination and cross-examination of the witnesses here is over, then the department inquiry can continue and the department inquiry can be finished, so that to avoid that the double jeopardy, that the reason why a person has been given protection remains intact. But again, there happened a problem when these type of precedent law came in. It tantamounted to lot of loss of a lot of difficulties in completing the departmental inquiries, because every departmental personnel would say that there is an FIR pending, there is a trial pending, there is a charge sheet pending, there is a cognizance order pending. So they would say that it is there, so please stop the department inquiry. If the departmental inquiry is stopped, then it will result into unnecessary loss to the employer, because the employer in the bargain would not be able to punish the employer or push him out of service or give him his requisite punishment, whatever he deserves. This was not possible. This resulted into a lot of anomalies and a lot of delays. So now, if you will see the latest judgments, you will find that the analogy given in the Captain Paul, etc., has been diluted. It has been diluted, and now the Honorable Apex Court has started saying that as far as possible, complete the departmental inquiry in its own stance, unless really it is a complicated and integral or intertwined question of law. So basically, the issue was the answer to the question was that yes, a criminal trial is different than any other proceedings, whether it is a disciplinary proceeding, civil proceeding, tort proceeding, or any other proceeding. But certainly, if it is having an impact over the other, then the other has to be stopped. However, the impact has to be assessed. In every small impact, the delay cannot be caused, and this cannot happen. Now, coming to Article 21, because it is a huge article, and it requires a lot of deliberation. Now, Article 21 was very interesting. Article 21 is one article which really has been used to its optimum by the precedent laws, and by the citizen and the governance has happily accepted the expansion of Article 21. And if we if we go through the list of expansions, we will find that it is one of the most beautiful connotations ever of the transformative law of constitution or any other law. Because why I'll call it transformative is because, and the jurists have been calling it that way, is because as the society is transformed, if we are like steel and we are flexible and we transform with the society, our strength increases. In case we become rigid like iron, we tend to break. So in case the constitution had to survive, or rather had to thrive, or rather had to have to stand up to the common citizen of this country, then it was necessary for it to expand. Otherwise, it would the vessel would be full, and you would all be the new generation would be all we have filled the vessel. The next generation will come in and say it is a filled vessel. It is of no good use use for us. But very beautifully, the law fraternity has risen up to the occasion, and very beautifully the vessel is emptied time and again, and it is refilled by the new component of the society. It is like a recharge, it is like a refurbishing, it is like renewal. It is something which is very important, and it is something which has really given a lot of strength to our constitution. Article 21 reaches out to right to go abroad, right to privacy, right to education, right to speedy trial, solitary confinement, handcuffing, delayed execution, public hanging, shelter, livelihood, medical health, custodial death, public hanging, doctor's assistance, pollution free, water and under trials, full development of child, cultural heritage, human dignity, harassment at workplace, reputation, social security, protection of family, honor killing, clean environment, noise pollution, illegal detention, fair trial, bail, solitary confinement. And it goes on and on. It can never stop, and it will never stop. Thank God, because it will never stop. Because if it stops, then it will stagnate. And we can't allow it to stagnate, because it is the perfume, it is the fresh air, it is the oxygen to the citizen of India. And this oxygen line, the more broad it becomes, more oxygen comes in, more purification of the society happens, and more will be required as we move forward, as we speed up towards our progress, as we speed up coming up in the world as a progressive country, as an industrial country, as a good economy, as a strong country. This line will have to be broadened and broadened. So that's why the eminence of now. But what happens is we can't deal with everything, but certain things I will definitely speak today, because they will really, I mean, for example, there was a huge debate which went on, which went on when we were seeing whether right to life and right to death were on the same pedestal, were to be kept on the same pedestal. So this was probably a debate which has gone long into the minds of the law fraternity of this country. Interesting. I'll divide it into 3 or 4 parts. First of all, let us discuss. Say, we are not, as I have repeatedly expressed, that we are not here to reach conclusions or determine that which conclusion is correct and which is wrong. Our only idea is to assess and analyze and learn, because it is a never-ending process, I hope and I suppose. So I take up the issue of death penalty. Now, like death penalty, it was a cause which was always intriguing, because 141 or probably 142 countries have already done away with the death penalty. So out of 200 countries in the world, 142 countries have already done it, and others, some 20 or some countries, are not giving death penalties even if they are there. On the other hand, there are countries like ours where whenever the media starts media trial on some serious cases, as we have seen in past, immediately there is a demand of giving death penalties. And death penalty law also has seen interventions in the shape of, probably Bachchan Singh was one big intervention, because 303 IPC, right, Ramkumar sir, 303 IPC. So this 303 IPC was struck down because it was
murder by life convict.
Life
convict murder, committing murder.
So that was a big intervention in which they said that no, you cannot, this will be jeopardizing the right to life, 303, and therefore it was done away with, because you can't go with the presumption that this person has to be given a death sentence.
Death sentence.
So therefore, death sentence became a cause of great debate in this country time and again. And friends, the Law Commission, probably 265th or 262nd, they have already recommended that the capital punishment be done away with. But the issue is, ultimately, it is within the hands of the legislature, which has to decide whether the capital punishment has to stay or it has to go. But it is we as law fraternity need to deliberate it continuously, so that whenever a decision is arrived at, then we can probably give our impetus, our inputs in that, and we can also arrive. Now, another part of this, something which is associated with this, is right to life and right to death, is an interesting provision of IPC, which we know as Section 309. Now, this Section 309, interestingly, in 1985, Delhi High Court in State versus Sanjay Kumar Bhatia said, when this young boy had consumed some pesticide, then it was argued that, well, whether he had a right to take his right or not, life or not, and if he had attempted to suicide, whether it was a crime or not. Delhi High Court made an observation that such boys or such person, such tender-hearted, tender-minded person, if he has attempted suicide, he requires medical treatment rather than being sent to jail, and rather than being in the company of other criminals, and rather than being treated as a convict. Rather, he is a victim, and he has to be taken as a victim, and he should be taken, cured, and psychologically he has to be supported, and they have to try to bring him out of this issue which led him to go for suicide. This recently also, a film star also has committed suicide. There was a lot of, the whole country was, so a lot of sadness was there. Another young tele actress also, she also committed suicide. So ultimately, the whole thing was whether this suicide part of it, why it is important is that how it has to be taken by the society. Can it be taken as a crime, or should it be taken, the person who is attempting has to be taken? So this State versus Sanjay Kumar Bhatia, Delhi High Court said nothing doing, 309 has to go. So 309, they sort of stuck off the application, deleted Section 309. Again, in Bombay High Court in 1987, in Maruti Shripati Dabal case, when this constable, he got badly injured, and he was so ill in the road accident, arising out of the road accident, that probably the right to life and liberty came in, and they wanted to say that whether his mental illness, which resulted into that accident and this everything, was entitled him to not to be prosecuted under Section 309. Again, Bombay High Court said 309 has to be deleted. But then Supreme Court in Peer, and then again there was another judgment, Chenna Jagdishwar versus State of UP, in which it was held that right to life does not necessarily signify right to die. So again, 309 was upheld. Why I am telling you these cases is not because of these names. Names are okay, good, they lay down the law, but how it travels, how the society travels. 309, it was said that no, right to life cannot be equated with right to die. So again, 309 was brought in, and there's somebody who wants to die, it is not proper. So again, the law changed. Then in P. Ratinam, again, it was held to be contrary to Article 21. And the Hon'ble Apex Court, AR 1994, it is reported. And then the Apex Court said that no, 309 is bad, so 309 law has to go, because suicide is, you are not harming anyone, and suicide is not akin to taking some life. You are inflicting something upon yourself, so it need not be a criminal offense. So decriminalization was done, and again, Honorable Supreme Court in 1991 in this Ratinam case did away with Section 309. But again, in Gyan Kaur versus State of Punjab in 1996, Honorable Supreme Court said that right to die and right to be killed is death with life. So again, it has gone into it, and it has said that whether such attempt is possible or not. So interesting part. It is not the journey of Section 309 of the IPC, but it is the journey of our thinking. It is the journey of the social thinking. How we think about I told you yesterday that in the case of adultery, One day a woman was victim, another day she was abettor, and now another day she was a chattel, another day she was a book, another day she was a property, and now finally society has sort of reflected her to be a independent of it as far as decriminalization is concerned. So in all these cases, we see the reflections that happened and that really go into these things. But then we all must remember that it is not that the Gyan Kaur brought an end to this journey. I had read in 2015, it was in headline that the central government was contemplating doing away with Section 309 of IPC legislatively by making the necessary amendments. But that also has not probably culminated into finality, and it is still remains under contemplation, and it is for us and it is for the fraternity and the legislators and the country to decide whether that person who is attempting to suicide is a victim or is an accused, and what will be the right to life, how we can associate right to life with right to die. Very, very interesting case law has been promulgated in the same side, that is euthanasia. We know world over it is a huge debate whether euthanasia has to be permitted or it cannot be permitted. So in Aruna Shanbag, we have seen that how Supreme Court has come out and how it has said that first time in our country, euthanasia, passive euthanasia has been agreed upon, passive euthanasia has been allowed, it has been made legal. And apart from passive euthanasia, we now also have a concept of living will, whereby a person can have a living will where his close, which can be executed by his close relatives and which also can be executed by the person who has been appointed by the court as the best friend or next friend. So the euthanasia also, universally we will see there are number of countries which are saying euthanasia is absolutely permissible. There are a number of countries which say that no, euthanasia is not permissible. I will also bring it to your knowledge that in Rajasthan there was a localized tradition of Santhara. It is in Jain Dharma. Now this Santhara, I don't know whether you know about it or not, but this Santhara was in which a person, if he starts getting, if he is near to God and he is at some age and ripe and feels connected with the God, he can give up his life in the name of God. So he doesn't give up his life directly, but he gives up eating. He starts fasting to death sort of thing. So it was supported by the community, saying that this is a way of giving tribute to the state and to the God and being divine, and to make ways. If a person is at the last, if he feels that he's in the last phase of life, he can, or he has now nothing to do but to go to the God, he can go about it. See, I am not on the spiritual part. I don't know whether I don't know whether it will be upheld or not, because it is still pending. But what I can for sure say, because Rajasthan High Court has done away with it. Rajasthan High Court Division Bench passed a judgment in which they said that Santhara is not, it is against right to life and it cannot be permitted. So it cannot be permitted. But then it has been stayed by the Honorable Apex Court and it is still pending adjudication. I am not on the point whether Santhara will stay or Santhara will not stay, whether right to attempt to suicide will stay or will not stay, or whether euthanasia will be there or it will not be there, whether capital punishment will be there or it will not be there. I am not here to conclude, because I know that a law fraternity or a law student of law should never conclude. It is only thing is that we are trying to understand right to life. We are trying to evaluate Article 21. We are trying to evaluate various questions which pose the society. We have to understand whether all these issues of traditions like Santhara and these euthanasia and these things, and it is for us to see. But again, I very firmly feel if it comes within the purview of violence, or if it comes within the purview of a tradition which is a social evil like sati, then it has to go. Then it is a violence upon a woman, then it is a violence upon a lady, and that practice, by under no pretext such social practices like sati can be allowed or can be put in the same basket. These baskets of euthanasia, attempt to suicide, they are different than those baskets where we are dealing with social evils. Attempt to suicide cannot be termed as a social evil. Euthanasia is not a social evil. Somebody is lying brain dead, somebody is lying completely next to death in medical condition. Doctors say he can't survive. Doctors say there is no, doctors say he will not survive.
You have some audio problem.
Is it?
Voice is
okay
discontinuous.
Okay. Am I audible to all, sir?
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, now audible?
Yes.
Oh, so it is not about attempt to suicide, or it is not about this. These are the things which have to be dealt with differently by the society, and the social evils have to be dealt with different. And one thing which I always say is that that has been said, which I always admire as a student of law. As a student of law is that which I liked in that judgment of Sabrimala was that when it comes to choosing constitutional morality and religious morality, then we have to, as legal fraternity, we have to rise up to the occasions, and we have to try to choose constitutional morality over the religious morality, because there might be differences in religious morality, but constitutional morality is the one thing which is going to keep us united, and which is going to be common for us all over the country. So these are the few aspects of Article 21 which I have tried to touch, and which I have tried to understand with you. Apart from this, we move to various aspects of the right to education. Now today we all see 21A. The whole thing came in only because there were judgments. Whole thing came in because right to education was recognized as a fundamental right. Whole thing resulted into the act coming in 2009-2010, whereby right to education was declared statutorily defined, and right to education was given a lot of meaning when the opportunities was expanded. A good legislation came in. One more thing, one more case which is very common, we all know, but I must talk about here when I am talking about Article 21 is Vishakha. Now Vishakha judgment for almost 10 to more than 10 years, there was no legislation. Once the judgment came in, there was supposed to be a legislation. There was criticism of the judgment on one count, that we have legislated, the judiciary has legislated. But we must remember that it was not a legislation, but it was a guideline which was issued until a legislation was in place. And legislation did not come up even 10 years after the judgment. So the protection of the women at working place was to be there. That fill in the blank had to come in. And so once it had come in, it was in place. And whenever the legislation came in, we have given the legislation has taken the due role where it has to take. Similarly, in the case of ADM Jabalpur, we have traveled up to Puttu Swami. Article 21 has traveled up to Puttu Swami. So ADM Jabalpur, we said the right can be suspended. But unfortunately, it was a judgment which was subsequently came into criticism from the legal fraternity, because Article 21 which is akin to other international monuments like American Constitution, Magna Carta, Japanese Constitution, and so many other laws. Article 21 was one thing which probably did not require to be suspended. But when the 9 High Court said it cannot be suspended, the Supreme Court said, but the dissenting judgment of Honorable Justice Khanna became the hallmark, and it took us to the future journey of the law. And we have moved ahead, and Puttu Swami, we have again brought it to a stop, and we have said that no, right to life cannot be suspended. Yesterday, we were also speaking about due procedure of law. The due procedure of law is always there, because due procedure of law, although it was fortified in Manka Gandhi and other judgments, but due procedure of law is always there, because otherwise, without due procedure of law, we cannot come to the actual definition of right to life, or right to speech, or right to equality. If we have to breach it, then also we require it, and if we have to fortify it, then also we require it. Now, another interesting judgment that we spoke a little bit about yesterday, also Sabrimala judgment, and also the other judgments where the rights of women and other persons, devotees, is concerned. The Honorable Apex Court has time and again sort of said that the religious morality versus vis-a-vis the constitutional morality has to be weighed at all times and seen as to what has to be done. It is another thing that there is another view also possible, that yes, if it is not a social, like I have particularly for a law student, the the dissenting part was interesting that yes, if it is not a social evil, if it is not affecting the social, if it is not detrimental to the society, if it is not affecting negatively to the society, then we can try to maintain those traditions and customs or religious beliefs which are there. So this was and these debates, let me tell you, like for example, live-in relationship. Now we have found the live-in relationship was never a prospect of law. It was never a concept of law, Indian laws. But slowly we saw that in our big towns and in our modern society, this concept rushed into big cities and into the younger generation. So if laws sit silently or blindfolded to the things which are happening in the society, because suppose I don't know the figure, but suppose there are 50 lakh couples who are living in live-in relations, suppose in Delhi, Bombay, or anywhere. Suppose there are 50 lakh persons. We can't, if someone out of them are being exploited or somebody's rights are being affected, we can't say that we don't know live-in relationships, so we'll not protect. So not only the Honorable Apex Court and the law fraternity rose to protect their life and liberty, but legislature also for the first time in Domestic Violence Act used the word that's another partner living under the same roof. So that live-in partner was given protection, by the legislature itself. Why? Because it was the need of the society. Why it was considered to be a part of right to life and right to liberty is that person, that spouse, we may not call it spouse, that partner required that protection from exploitation or any other thing which was adversely affecting his or her rights. So those rights had to be protected. Now these debates are not going to come to an end. We are going to see these debates which are there. They will continue, because it is a live-in partnership was one thing. It doesn't mean that it has come to an end. Tomorrow the Domestic Violence Act may be amended and something more to it may be added. So it is up to the society to see how far we have to go, how far we have to accept this. We all remember the LGBT judgment, in which we all remember the decriminalization of Section 377. We remember it is not that 377, it were two adults who were consenting and were having a way of life. There was a whole lot of criticism that 377 is an improper relationship, it is an improper orientation, and sexual orientation cannot become a ground to interference by the courts, so let it remain in the IPC. But then again, when it was stuck, see, initially we remember the same Honorable Supreme Court said that no, 377 is good. But within some time only, within probably 2-3 years only, again the Honorable Apex Court says no, the 377 decriminalization has to be done. So these are not absolute judgments. These are judgments which have to be followed by us keenly, and which have to be taken to the conclusion as the society wants. So if two adult persons, consenting adults, wanted to have a particular orientation, Supreme Court recognized it to the extent that it would be decriminalized. It is not that we are wanting that persons in our society, or the law fraternity or the judicial verdict do not want the society to go and practice that kind of sexual orientation. We are only saying that we are since people of that orientation are already in existence. So therefore we need not close our eyes, but we should keep our eyes open and try to protect them, try to protect those persons, so that in times to come we are able to say that some part we are able to say that we are not exploiting them. At least we can satisfy our conscience as law keepers of this country, as lawyers, judges, and teachers, that yes, we are not exploiting that particular orientation. So this all like there was a huge debate, matrimonial rape, a slight concept crept into 376 also. Now matrimonial rape, there was a huge debate. One time they said no, all complete matrimonial rape has to come in. Then said no, society. Then the jurists said, J.S. Verma Commission also deliberated upon it. Law commissions have also deliberated. Then slowly it came in that the society is still not ready completely for matrimonial rape. So matrimonial rape completely, if a lady is allowed to say, because we are having our matrimony irrespective of all religion, all caste, everywhere, wherever we are, our matrimony is having a different sanctity than which is there in the contractual form of matrimony in very many countries. So we were probably mentally not prepared for matrimonial rape. But remember, this does not mean that it has gone out of the basket forever. If the society one day feels that no, matrimonial rape has to be there, matrimonial rape will definitely fully come in. Now it is only for minor that we are trying to distinguish, but complete concept of matrimonial rape may come in if someday society wants, and we as students of law will continue to deliberate and continue to rise up to the occasion as the society and the citizen wants us to do. So these were the issues, even the election laws which were dealt with were very interesting. The Article 21 expanded to election laws, free and fair election. I'll take only one small example because we are running out of time. Other articles are also there. The Nota. You all remember what a wonderful inclusion it was. Like Nota, now the citizen of India while voting would be entitled to have that third button, that neither he wants A nor he wants B, but he wants no one. So slowly then the law also laid down that how while expanding Article 21, the law laid down that the persons who are there as politicians have to disclose their antecedents, if any criminal antecedents are there, or if any unusual antecedents are there, which a voter must know to exercise a proper franchise. To exercise a proper franchise, he must know. So all these things they have traveled. This is constitutional traveling. This is constitutional traveling on the shoulders of Part 3 of the Constitution. And these broad shoulders, they keep on broadening themselves as and when the citizen requires them. The Hadia case was also one such case where this lady was permitted to take her own choice, irrespective of her religion and irrespective of her husband's religion. Yesterday I had spoken about that one case. I saw that judgment was Sarla Mudgal, in which this person was trying to take up Islam only because he wanted to defeat bigamy. But that the court did not permit. The court said that if you are there in that religion and you are professing that religion and that practice is there, good. But for overcoming any illegality, if you are changing your religion, it cannot be permitted. So that is how the jurisprudence has developed. We have seen that how the maintenance part of it has gone from Shah Banu to the recent judgments, and how we have changed triple talaq and how we have changed other judgments also. So all these judgments, they have Article 21 in between, which is circling and which is telling us how the society wants to move. And when we see that here is a case now, finally we see, and it is not so easy to decide. It is not so easy to decide. Do you all remember the adjudication happening to the Bombay Dance Bar Association matters? I have keenly tried to follow that how the Supreme Court would go. On one side, there will be so many arguments that whether it will be moral on the part of society to have dance bars, whether it will be immoral, or whether it is, and they were here before the Supreme Court with right to livelihood, whether such right to livelihood can be protected, and if it can be protected, how far it can be protected. So the answers came in slowly. It was not overnight that the answer. The state took an action. They said, no, this is not good for women. This is not good for their safety. They came into the court through their association. They say right to livelihood is affected. Right to life is affected. So some permission. Then some permission was granted with certain restrictions that don't do this, don't do that. Certain do's and don'ts were prescribed. But see, it is the equilibrium which has to be drawn, which is to be drawn by the law fraternity, which is, I don't intend to discuss, but many countries, even right to prostitution is recognized as a legal right. Now, in our country, we can't even think of it because our moral fabric is totally different. Our thinking and our society reflects totally different. But we all of us know that very many countries properly recognize it on the pretext. They have a reason. It is not that they are blindly trying to propagate the cause of, their reason is health. Their reason is safety. Their reason is safeguarding the life and liberty of those persons who are almost like victims. So it is also an analogy. See, a law student is always to keep his mind open. So this is the beauty of Article 21, that how it has to progress, how it has to go ahead. Article 21, therefore, to my mind, is the best, is the article which is for a student of law, It is an article which one must carry on reading. It can never come to an end. We can come to an end. The article cannot come to an end. Article 22, preventive detention, has gone from A.K. Gopalan at that time, who was a so-called a communist believer. And his habeas corpus was in A.K. Gopalan was dealt with by the Hon'ble Apex Court. And the whole idea of Article 22 or the detention laws was whether it can be prospectively applied, whether it can be retrospectively applied, whether there could be, whether the detainees are, how far a detainee's rights could be. We then saw MISA, we saw TADA, we saw NSA, some came, some went, some stayed. So the question is, Article 22 also has, we have seen that it is a long journey. We have seen Ahmed Noorman Bhatt, we have seen Sambhunath Sarkar, we have seen Golaknath, Khadak Singh, Menka Gandhi, where the rights were slowly expanded. But broadly, what I see out of Article 22 is that though probably the retrospective law is or if it is brought by legislature, it is permissible. But broadly, if a person's action at that time were not punishable when it was actually committed, then probably as a student of law, I understand that probably at that time he cannot be imposed with that kind of restrictions. It is now the difference would be afflicting a punishment and afflicting a detention. They are two different things. Punishment is something where we are punishing a person for a particular thing. Detention is something where we are detaining a person to prevent something or to maintain the law and order and to try to stop it from happening. So the jurisprudence, the preventive jurisprudence and the punitive jurisprudence, although those 5 components of reformative, preventive, and all these are same, but these are two different lines of thoughts. So Article 22 also, to my mind, will continue to, Sunil Batra threw a lot of light on it. And we had Nabila also, where we saw that the detainees' rights were discussed at great lengths by the Hon'ble Apex Court. Legal fraternity, totally put themselves into it. But ultimately, the detention laws have to be fair, transparent, and reasonable. And to the core, what I could understand lies the reason for the detention. If the detaining authority or the detention authority is able to put sufficient material, the sufficient material is the key word. If the sufficient material is brought before, which can substantiate or which can justify the detention, then only true spirit of Article 22 has to survive. Unless that is there, a pure power of detention, irrespective of its fairness and rational and substantive material, probably cannot be sustained in these times. As we connect Article 21 with Article 22. Article 23 has already played its innings well. Article 23, I will take you through only 2 cases. One is People's Union of Democratic Right, Union of India, and another is Sanjit Roy. Both these in these matters, if you all recollect, one was about the Asiads, and another was pertaining to some work going on in Asiad, and another is this Sanjit Roy was in Rajasthan. So in Rajasthan, friends, what happened? Famine relief work was going on. So just to provide famine relief, government was calling people and giving them some money and getting them work done. Probably this could be acceptable in the times of kings, when they will call people in time of famine, give them to eat. There were less resources. Democracy was not there. And the basic problem was to feed them and to take work out of them. Now, after the Honorable Supreme Court has clearly said by the force of Article 23, the beggar or begari or these things are not acceptable. Anything below minimum wages is not acceptable. And in that judgment of Sanjit Roy versus State of Rajasthan, the action of the state to provide famine relief below minimum wages was struck down. And it was said that no, at least the minimum wages have to be provided, even if it is for the famine relief. Even if those persons are facing hunger, then also you cannot exploit them. Just because they are in an adverse circumstance, you can't exploit them, and you have to give them minimum wages and a dignified way of life, because dignity of life became a parallel to life. Article 20. So this is how jurisprudence of Article 23 went ahead. Article 24 was also has traveled a long distance. The most fundamental case we'll touch only slowly. We'll touch only one part of it. That is that if we all remember that famous MC Mehta case, in which this Shivakasi area, under 14 children, they were working in the fire factory, in the firecracker factories and all that. So the whole point which came out was that these were hazardous job, hazardous labor. So by force of Article 21, on the Supreme Court said that doing this kind of work by the children has to be prohibited. But thereafter, legislative action, the legislature has also become proactive. Now we have very good laws, very good recent laws which provide for good protection for children. We have stringent conditions and stringent punishments in place. And in courts, day in and day out, as lawyers and judges, we see that the law enforcing machinery is doing an efficient job in putting to task those persons who are taking the work out of small children. There is another side to the same coin. I remember about 7-10 years ago when I was a lawyer, this one in the court canteen itself, there were a number of canteens in the court area, and these small children were working. So the press report said that under the diya there is andhera. So under the nose of, so it was quite little bit a lot of embarrassment for us. So we then requested the registrar to take requisite steps to ensure that the canteens in the court and they would be done away with the children working there and all that. But this is one thing in the society which we are fighting and which we are consistently fighting. But probably Article 24 has also traveled in a good direction, and probably our laws protecting our children are now very sound. And slowly, as the society moves on, we are going to improve more. Right to religion, Article 25 to 28, we have seen number of cases, Hanif Qureshi, Swamiyar, Robust Khunam, and other judgments which have Aziz Basha. The whole thing is Article 25 and 29, 26 and 26, 27 and 28, 25, 26, 27, 28. Basically, we can understand it like this, that we have given our citizen a complete liberty to profess as a religion, to profess his religious rights. But yesterday also we have spoken about it. Secularism is part of our basic structure. So the state action cannot smack of religious beliefs. The state action we cannot justify any kind of action by the state which would be in favor or against any particular belief. Probably it should be neutral, it should be secular. Whereas a personal belief, the freedom, this is what is probably the best flexible part of our constitution, which has given this country this great strength. I see as an example that Europe has around 50 to 60 countries, 50 countries in Europe, and European Union has a large number of countries. This European Union, all of us have seen, they have started in these modern times, all those modern countries, all those superpowers, France, Germany, England, Spain, Italy, all those getting together, trying to make a conglomeration, trying to make a union, one euro currency, one this, that. We had 550 states. And out of those 550 states, we have carved this great nation. And diversity is our key. So for that, diversity has to be protected. That diversity has to be understood. That diversity has to be respected. That diversity has to be cultured. That diversity has to be protected. Probably there lies the answer to these articles, where we have to understand that even those modern nations today are struggling hard to keep together. They are facing Brexit. They are facing Italian revolution, where they are saying that this European Union is of no good use. They are the most developed nations of the country, the conglomeration of most developed countries of the world. They are breaking apart. They are breaking apart because they could not sustain the heat of diversity. But remember, we have been able to tackle it at the strength of such laws which are there with us, which give us that individual freedom, which we have slowly, out of these cases, we have slowly come out and slowly seen that how these individual freedoms have been protected. There might be aberrations. Friends, there might be aberrations, but I'm sure as a student of law that our law and our constitution is sound enough to deal with it. And this is the reason why today we don't even remember that there were 550 states. We only remember that we have these 30 states to take care of. We only remember our federalism. We only remember our strong federalism and and the beautiful federalism where unitary nature is also imbibed, where how we have dealt with COVID situation is a good example of that. How the nation as one body, as one entity, has risen up to the occasion to fight the world pandemic, where the other countries were struggling hard to do it. We saw in America states, one state fighting another, one state fighting union, union fighting states. Nothing of this sort happened in India not because our political parties do not know how to fight, not because our citizen does not know how to fight for his rights, but because we have strong roots in the shape of constitutional provisions like this. It is because of this that the world pandemic, we are able to, even in such disastrous conditions, we are able to face it as one. Though the religion part and pandemic has no connection, but this is one thing which comes out of mind of a law student, that how the federal structure works and how the unitary quasi-federal structure how it has gone ahead even than the original federal structure and the original unitary structures. Our states have their own independence. At the same time, our union has its own place, which is much more stronger than any other union in the world. And the Article 29 to 30, which were basically about the cultural and educational rights, we have seen that in Aziz Basha, Naresh Agarwal, Batinda College. If we let us understand it more, we saw St. Stephen's case. In St. Stephen's case, they said that we are Christian minority, so we take only Christians. So the law came in and interfered and said, no, take Christians, take it. You have a right to minority, but be reasonable. So the law came in that 50% you take by merit and 50% you take by your minority consideration. Thereafter, the law further developed, and even St. Stephen mandate got behind, and we got a new mandate. The newer mandate was we have to be more reasonable. In these times when merit and all other things are more important, we can't replace them by considerations like this. But certainly, if you are administering it, if you have formed it, then you will have certain upper hand. But the same has to sustain the rigors of reasonableness. The test of reasonableness remains as the touchstone of the highest test, which need to be seen by all these institutions, whether it is TMFI, whether it is the Islamic Society, whether it is the St. Xavier College. All these matters we have seen that how these institutions have tried to survive, how these institutions tried to project a different picture arising out of these articles, but we have allowed them and we will allow them. And we not means you and me, we means our constitution has allowed them, and our constitution will continue to protect them, but with the test of reasonableness, which has to be very, very threadbare there, so that to ensure that even I remember there was a case of Aligarh Muslim University where it was said that no Muslims should be given the maximum portion of the admission seats and all that. So then again the controversy arose whether it was administered by them, it was formed by them or not, and so other countries. And then the final result which came in was there has to be reasonableness. You have to give merit its due place. So slowly the society, which was more tilted towards such religious and other inclinations and these protections, has slowly moved towards merit, of giving certain safeguards which are there, they have to run. Even the tax which is prohibited to be taken for development of any religion, it has been repeatedly interfered with, and it has been said that any pretext taking any money from any religious people to propagate that particular religion would be bad in the eye of law. So these were the issues which we need to, we continue to deliberate. Sagir Ahmed and Dwarka Das Srinivas and all these judgments we have seen that how these, now Article 32, we have seen that how it has expanded. We have seen that how we, from the 4 writ petitions, how we have grown. We have seen that how we have, because the concept of not that we did not have a concept of habeas corpus or mandamus or prohibitory, but the whole, or the habeas corpus, but the whole thing was that how far can we expand? I'll give only 1 or 2 small examples. Like we now have, since probably late 1980s, we have a concept of curative writ petition. Now, what is curative writ petition? It is not there in the Constitution. Article 32, you would not find curative writ petition. But now curative writ petition is there to say, because it is said to be an ultimate weapon in the hand of a lawyer or in the hand of a citizen for the benefit of the citizen, where if something is happening, some grave illegality is happening, they have their norms. One senior advocate should give his consent that there is grave irregularities happened. So many norms it has to qualify. Then only it is there that we can come into it. Curative writ petition can come. Otherwise, curative writ petition is not there in the constitution. It is not there in the writ petition. It was not even there in the writ jurisprudence. But these are evolutions. Public interest litigation, Husainara Khatun, Karamchari Sangh, so MC Mehta, this, that, what was it? These were the tools which were whereby we exercised our writ jurisdictions and we strengthened them to protect our citizens. Probably this should be good. I have tried to cover every aspect of it. If some small aspect is left out, we can cover it some other time. But yes, from my side, this topic is over. Now the question and answers should immediately start so that we can take it ahead.
Sir, definitely, sir. I mean, in the meanwhile, can you, sir, just check your network connection because the video is breaking. Sound is clear, but the video is breaking.
I'll check. It is all right.
Now it's absolutely all right, sir. But in the last phase, the video wasn't there, but the sound and everything was very clear, sir.
You point me out this time. If it is wrong, I'll try to check it out.
Okay, sir.
Otherwise, my network is showing full strength.
Wonderful, sir. Sir, before we open up for discussion and comments from the expert panel, we have Justice Ramkumar, sir. We have Justice Nagamuthu, sir. We have Justice Ramushan, sir. Everybody is there. Before that, I mean, the number of questions that has come up, I'll just confine to two statements and then we'll go on to that, sir. Number one is we have Aruna Shanbag's case of 2011, followed by 2018, I believe, common cause case, wherein right to life includes right to die with dignity also. I'm not on the element of what you call euthanasia as such, but still, sir, what would be your take on the fact that I can decide when to end my life? If there is a right to life, there ought to be a right to die.
See, that is why I did not tell you only the positive judgments. I told you that is why we discussed both side judgments. Madras High Court and Bombay High Court were not wrong in saying that the right to life does not include right to die. And Madras High Court and Bombay High Court were not wrong in saying that 309 has to be brought out because he is a victim. But then again, Supreme Court has said no. But even if we allow this, it will going to cause havoc because right to die and right to life are not same. In 1996, Supreme Court said that. But I believe as a student of law that right to die is such a right. Whether you speak of Santara, whether you speak of euthanasia, active euthanasia, passive euthanasia. See, we have to open up slowly. I totally agree with your proposition that right to die, right to have a dignified death, right to dignified funeral and all is accepted. There is no doubt about it. Right to die also has to, one day society will completely give right to die its prominence. But that can be only done after we reach that kind of awareness and that kind of maturity.
Sir, if I'm to perceive that a right to a dignified life is impossible for me, should I continue living an undignified life?
These are the parameters, sir, which cannot be answered. Which can't be answered. Suppose I say
that is where the doubt arises, sir. When you say that
if my son says, if you don't get me a Mercedes, my life is no good and it is not worth living. Or correct. If my daughter says that if you don't send me to Las Vegas for honeymoon, don't marry me. It will be useless. It is better to live an unmarried life. So I will have to it is very relative. And it is interesting. It is very interesting question, but at the same time, it is very relative. And I think that the broader terms of dignity has to be followed. And that is why we say that we should give everyone some sort of minimum requirements of shelter, food, and these should be available.
Sir, especially in this era of we recognizing the third gender, or rather living in relationship, or unnatural offenses is no longer unnatural as long as both consent. If that be the case, why can't somebody die with dignity, or somebody can choose death as such? And even when attempt to suicide, I believe, subject to correction, Ramkumar sir, it is decriminalized, I believe.
No, no, it is not.
Still,
it is still there. They have decriminalized it in that judgment initially, but then this 1996 judgment is holding the field.
Overruled, yes. It is.
That has been Ratanavan. That judgment has been overruled. It has been.
Sir, it is just like saying that committing the offense, you escape, but attempting, you get screwed up.
You are right. You
Sir,
are right. And you are right.
One more issue, sir. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Please.
Please.
LGBT and all these rights is again. LGBT is a huge part of our population. How can we go on denying them this? I mean, how long can we deny them their right to? I mean, they are getting elected. They are getting, even now there will be forms in employment also. You will get that third gender thing in this thing. So these are the things which are bound to come and which we can't ignore. Even if we want to close our eyes and we say no employment for transgenders, no social help, no medical help, no nothing for transgender. But this can't happen. These, if we consider them human beings, then we have to give them all those rights. If we have not opened up, we have to open up. If we have opened up, we have to open up more. And we have to, finally, the society will have to giving them more rights ultimately, because they are there in large numbers. What can we do?
Even living has not been recognized directly. It's only impliedly, because you find areas in the new generation laws which recognizes that, but directly it has not been recognized.
No, but then again, in Domestic Violence Act, you say that partner remaining under the same.
Sir, that requires some sort of inference from the.
No, that partner is nothing, but it is that only. And probably Parliament has done a very intelligent job that by directly not saying living in relationship, they are not propagating it, but at the same time they are protecting it. So it is not the judiciary alone or the lawyers alone. It is the Parliament also which is equally conscious of the fact that these things are. Suppose, for example, sir, in your town or in Trivandrum, you find there are 50,000 couples who are living in live-in relationship, and you see out of those 50,000, there are about 1,000 girls who are suffering exploitation at the hands of their partners. As a lawyer, if they come to you, those 1,000 girls, any one of them or ladies, you bound to have a solution to that. You can't tell them that since this relationship is not there, your exploitation has to go on. It is, we as lawyers, or as a system of law, we have absolutely no remedy for you. So this cannot happen. There has to be a remedy to all things, except for if something is illegal. Unless you say that no, living relationship is illegal. If Parliament tomorrow decides it is illegal, no person will live together except for marriage. It decides, which probably is not likely to happen with the current generation coming in. Yours and our generation will agree that yes, such law may be there. We may agree to such law, but the generation today will never agree to that, and they will certainly like to sustain that liberty which they have got probably.
Sir, before we open up for discussion and comments,
Gyan Kaur judgment 1996 is still holding the field in Supreme Court. So 309 has not been decriminalized.
Correct,
no, Supreme Court, you are right. Earlier judgment, Rathinam versus Union of India was there, but it has been overruled in the Gyan Kaur. But I also hope, as a student of law, that 309 will be decriminalized soon. As a student of law, not as a position holder. That is just a chance.
Sir, one more aspect, and then we'll open up, sir. Freedom. Yesterday we mentioned that, but today I thought we covered the topic. Freedom of religion, but freedom from religion. Can I say I'm irreligious? I am an atheist or an agnostic? Is it possible under the Indian Constitution?
Yes, I don't. The answer remains the same as it was yesterday, sir. That these liberties are always there. Tell me one thing in this world, one right in the country which is dependent upon your following the religion. Tell me one right. Your right to eat, right to live, right to medication, right to transportation. Any right, is it dependent upon your going to the temple or the church or the mosque or the Gurdwara? It is nothing. No religion right. No right to religion or no religious belief precludes you from the essential rights that a citizen has. All the rights, your right to property, your right to livelihood, your right to employment, everything is free from religion. So it is easily possible to say that if a person doesn't want to believe in religion, he has all in our constitution, he has all the freedom, all the liberty, all the safety, and all the complete safeguards that he can lead a good, healthy, and a
Sir, right to conscience may take in that, in the sense like I can be religious, irreligious, or whatever it is. I don't know. It is possible, right, sir?
yes, your mother can come and tell you and put your and catch your ears and tell you that please come to the religious place and apply this thing. But no other person can.
Correct.
Or your father can tell you that you have to apply to these religious functions, and your elders in the family can push you, but or your children can lovingly tell you to do that, but then nobody else can do that.
Absolutely, sir. Over to Ramkumar, sir. Please, sir. Your comments.
See, in Malayalam, there's a saying, Pushpam പോലെ ചെയ്യും പുഷ്പം. Pushpendra Singh has done it like a pushpam, like a flower. So simple, lucid style, and what should I say? The felicity of language and the pleasant disposition and the effortless speech has made your lecture very excellent, beautiful.
Very kind words, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Over to Justice Ramakrishnan, sir.
Good evening, brother. Really, we are enjoying your language. Simple, but understand, because very easy to understand. Very simple language that you have used. Although we are normally used to have complex sentences or compound sentences with some, what do you call, literal value sentences. But you have really taken the class in such a way that even a small child can understand what is a constitution is. Really, it's a loving lecture, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ramakrishnan, sir. Over to you, Justice Nagamuthu, sir.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Justice Pushpendra. Really, it was a wonderful lecture. And yesterday I missed your lecture because of some technical problem. Today I am really fortunate to hear you. And there are two other, my elder brothers are there. As they said, it was really excellent. But only one more thing I want to play before you for your comments. See, the third gender has been recognized now by the Supreme Court. Now my query is, suppose a third gender dies or a Hindu male dies, but the transgender, the third gender will be entitled for inheritance, either under section 6 or 8, I'm sorry, or under section 16 of the Hindu Marriage Act. If a Hindu male dies, who will take the property? If a Hindu female dies, who will take the property? Son, class 1 here, son, daughter. If a transgender is neither a son nor a daughter, Supreme Court says so, then how they will acquire inherit properties from their parents? Suppose
they have the choice, is it not?
No, they don't.
They have the choice, is it not?
No, they have got the choice either to be recognized as a female or a third gender. If they once identify themselves as a third gender, they cannot claim as a female. Because in law, as per the judgment of the Hon'ble Justice Radhakrishnan, they have to identify themselves sexually. Yes. If they identify that they are third genders, then they form a separate class, neither males nor females. How can they inherit property from their parents? Suppose a transgender leaves behind some properties. She dies. What will happen to her property? Who will take?
State.
Yes.
Estate.
Estate property.
Probably, sir, the fifth option, the agnates, cognates, and the first class, second class will go away, and state can take away. But then these are things which are really thought-provoking.
Challenges that the law has to face.
It is not. These things we will have to. Sir is right. We will have to really, work on it. It is not so easy to say. It is very easy to say that a state can be successful.
Yes. One more issue is also there. Suppose the son says that he is not my brother, he is only a transgender. Who will recognize whether he is a transgender or not? Who is to say that?
You are right, sir.
Who is the competent authority to declare the sex? Because in general, the first person who declares the gender or sex of a child is the doctor by means of physical appearance. Then people, the society recognizes either as a male or a female, only by physical appearance. Now, third gender, who will recognize whether she is a transgender or not? For the purpose of
You're calling it she.
Let's see what the parliament
we are all retired people and you are presently in the helm of affairs. Please kindly keep this in your mind. And
we understand.
Nagamuthu sir is still alive as vigil as senior counsel in the Supreme Court. So you can,
yes.
whenever things comes, you can
yes.
agitate and you can find out a solution for that also.
Yes, in the Supreme Court Bar Association, I gave a lecture exclusively on this. I pointed out this. Thank you. Thank
that
you.
That is why you are trapping us on a wrong foot.
No. Thank you. Wonderful lecture. Really enjoyed it. As it was said.
Justice Nagamuthu has such stocks.
Our pleasure, sir.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Thank you. There are many people waiting in the line. Therefore, I do not want to take much time.
It is wonderful. He or she will decide, sir.
We'll decide.
I think let us go to Mohan Kumar.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mohan Kumar, sir. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
But
Yes,
we
sir.
can't
What
see
is your
you.
question?
We can't see you.
Oh, I see.
Yes, sir. What is your question?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What is your question?
No, yesterday I put a question.
Yes, sir.
anyway, I can explain that today. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir. We are audible.
You are visible and audible. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Hello. The question yesterday I put was that regarding my doubt as to whether any conflict is there between the 7 judges bench decision Shirurmat case and in the 5 judges bench decision SP Metals case 83 Supreme Court AR 1983 Supreme Court page 1. Because my question was as to religious denomination. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mohan Kumar, sir, just go ahead. Forget about.
Okay. See, in the Shirurmat case, the apex court has held under Article 26B, a religious denomination or an organization enjoys complete autonomy in the matter of deciding as to what rites and ceremonies are essential according to the tenets of the religion they hold, and no outside authority has any jurisdiction to interfere. No outside authority has any jurisdiction to interfere with their decision in such matters. But in Shirurmat case, though the 7 judges bench decision accepted and reiterated, it was held. We have also pointed out that the administration of the property of a religious denomination is different from the right of the religious denomination to manage its own affairs in matters of religion, and that laws may be made which regulate the right to administer the property of a religious denomination. Questions merely relating to administration of properties belonging to a religious group or institution are not matters of religion to which clause B of Article 26 applies. So I think that I made my point clear.
Yes, Mohan sir, you are absolutely clear.
Yeah. So 26B, where it is stated that right to manage its own affairs, I am underlining its own affairs, is a matter of religion. That was explained in SP Metals case that right to manage means right to manage its properties and not as to the right to profess religion, because that is covered by Article 25. This was the question yesterday I put. I'm amplifying the scope of my question.
Absolutely. We all absolutely understand your question, Mohan sir. You are absolutely clear in your thing. It is only that narrow difference that you are trying to point out, that how far it can, professing religion and managing, what difference it would be. Probably that is your question. And probably, like for example, this is not only a dispute to these two judgments which you are referring to, but this is a dispute which goes back to the various disputes caused in various parts of our country also, where people have been, the various agencies have been trying to profess religions, various religion, and they administer or to administer a religion and to profess. We have been trying to, they seem akin to each other, but administration of religion can be like maintenance, can be something like carrying the, tackling the funds, huge funds like Tirupati or like any other shrine board or any this thing, tackling the funds or administering it. And professing the religion could be a bit different on the ceremonies and on the other parts. So probably your point is clear. The answer of your question lies in your own question itself. And probably this difference has to be kept alive, so that whenever there is a conflict, we can say administration nobody can stop. Professing, there can be reasonable restrictions. We move on with that, sir, because Mohan sir is himself, quite clear what he wants to say.
And yes, Mr. Prem has explained it in a conversation just before this webinar started.
Okay.
Mr. Prem?
Yeah. It was a very fantastic lecture, sir, and we are all spellbound.
Thank you.
With regard to this question, let me first tell you, every Supreme Court in the world, except the Indian Supreme Court, except the Indian Supreme Court, relies on a very famous statement which was made by Robert Jackson, who was a judge of the US Supreme Court. That when he was a judge, he goes on to say that we are not final because we are infallible, but we are infallible only because we are final. You can see the Supreme Court also has often not only been fallible or wrong, it also is not always been final. You can see judgments coming one after the other. We have seen ever so many decisions being thrown overboard. And now just see. First of all, what you have to keep in mind, why was Article 25 of the Constitution, why it was enacted? That was the first question. That is the first question we have to ask. Now, let me just tell you, the Shirur case which you were asking, that's a 7-judge bench decision, 54 Supreme Court 282. First, the Shirur case, it was one which merely considered the test of what you call the essential religious practice. Justice Mukherjee answering for the bench, he goes on to say the essential part of a religion. What's the essential part of a religion? First he says, what's a denomination? That I think it's a paragraph 15 of the judgment. Then he goes on to define what's a religion, beautifully defined. And of course, religion has been defined taking into account one of the rulings of the American courts during 1888. If I'm not wrong, I think so. Just refer to the decision. Now see, what was the case which Shirur was concerned? Shirur in fact was concerned only with an appeal by a division bench of the Madras High Court, wherein a petition was allowed, which was a writ petition under Article 226, which sought for a writ of prohibition for what? From proceeding with some sort of settlement of a scheme in connection with the mud, which we call the Shirur mud. And the petitioner was the head or the superior. Now, Shirur was not concerned only with that specific question, which was one concerning section 61 of the old Madras Hindu Religious Endowments Act at that point of time, of a 27 Act. Now just see SP Mittal. SP Mittal, it's a 5-judge bench. SP Mittal, it considered regarding the Aurobindo Ashram. Right? Am I not right? Hello?
Yeah, right.
We can see and hear you.
Okay, just see. The issues which are raised according to me in that Shirur, 82 Supreme Court page 1, the ruling which you were referring to, there were 4 issues which comes into consideration. One, that the Parliament did not have the legislative competence to enact the statute. That was something what you call the Auroville Emergency Provision Act of 1980. That was in challenge. Number 2 was that the Impugned Act that infringes 4 articles came into play: 25, 26, 29 and 30. And of course, Article 14 also was inter alia challenged and saying that particular act was malefied. But now see Article 26, just see Article 26. Article 26 is very clear to your question itself. Article 26 postulates 3 conditions are there, subject to 3 conditions. Number 1 is the public order, number 2 is the public morality, and number 3 is the public health. Accepting all those, I mean subject to these 3 conditions, it is not only every religious denomination, kindly see, every religious denomination or any section thereof. It's not a merely religious denomination or any section thereof. And it confines to 4 different set of things. One is for the, of course, A is for establishment and management of the maintenance of the institutions, which are there. Number 2, just see, to manage its own affairs in the matter of religion. To manage its own affairs. Kindly read the heading also. I'm not going to say that the heading controls 26B. But kindly see, this particular 26B is merely concerning to affairs in the matter of religion. Kindly see D, clause D. Clause D deals exclusively with administering the property in accordance with the law. And now you can see there is another judgment which later on comes. That is a 72 Supreme Court 1586. That's a constitution which decision in the Ethiraja Ramanuja Swami's case. That is a constitution which decision. Where you can see another decision of section, 62 Supreme Court. That is Sardar Tahir. I don't remember the name of the judgment actually. It is something like Sardar Said or something. 62 Supreme Court, page 1856 or 62 Supreme Court. That is by His Lordship Chief Justice Sinha, who had 4 constitution benches at that point of time. Mind you, 4 constitution bench decisions. Now, what was considered were the contents concerning Article 25 and 26. This comes up for consideration. And first case was the Shirurmat case, 54. Then the Jagannath Ramanuja's case was there. Again by Justice Mukherjee, 54 Supreme Court, page 400. Another constitution bench. Then comes another constitution bench, Ajmer Dargah case, 61 Supreme Court, page 1402. By Justice Gajendra Gadkar. Now see, considering all these things, he has clearly went on to say, all these 5 constitution benches would say, that first is that the protection of this article is not limited to the matters regarding the doctrine or the belief they extend, but also to all the acts which are done in pursuance of a religion. And you can just see that particular decision would say, it goes on to guarantee not only for this particular 26A, B, C and D. Under 26B, you have a guarantee for your rituals. You have a guarantee for your observance. You have a guarantee for your ceremonies. You have a guarantee for all your modes of worship, which are all treated as integral parts of your religion. Now, the second is that what constitutes essential part of religious or what you call the religious practice, that has to be decided with reference to the doctrine of every particular religion. You cannot merely have a straitjacket formula. It has to be construed, or rather it has to, what constitutes the essential part, it would vary as what is that particular thing which concerns a particular religion, which includes several types of practices, right? And you cannot put it in a straitjacket, because I don't think that there is any mismatching between 83 Supreme Court and this 54 Supreme Court. To my limited knowledge, even in 83 Supreme Court, Shirurmat case was referred to. Am I right or wrong?
That was referred to.
Just see 26B and 26D. One speaks of management. 26D by itself, that speaks of administration. So you can clearly say one is regarding the managing the affairs in the matters of religion. It has nothing to do with the property actually. Just see that. What do you mean by religious affairs?
With the property.
It cannot be confined only to movable and immovable property. You have to take into consideration each and everything, like observance ceremonies, what all I said. See, this has been settled. I don't think that there is, anyway, you have raised a debatable issue, but in my limited knowledge, based on this judicial precedents which we have, and even in Sabrimala case also you have the 5-judge bench ruling, which runs counter actually to the Shirurmat 7-judge bench. As His Lordship Justice Pushpendra Singh Bhati has told you, the answer for your question lies in your question itself, Article 26 itself. So this my humble view is like this.
I may take one more second, just 1 second. Because in Shyampadmanassociates case, Shyampadmanassociates case has also to be read along with this. There, the distinction has been drawn between Article 25 and Article 26. What is religious and what is secular, that has been made clear in Shyampadmanassociates case. If you read along with that, a doubt may arise whether Article 25 confines only to religious activities and Article 26 confined to secular activities. That was the doubt.
No. You cannot say. I don't think that Seshamal would have such a ruling. Article 26 confines to.
No.
It is his version. It is his version.
No. I don't say that. But the distinction between, I just cited an example, appointment of a pujari or is a secular function.
Kindly tell me the strength of Seshamal. Seshamal also is a constitutional bench.
Constitutional bench.
Right. Now just see, because
that is laid on in Sabrimala case.
I know, because in Sabrimala case, in 3 or 4 cases you have Seshamal also. Same thing.
Anyway, we'll have to discuss it later.
We will see.
No, we will wait for the review judgment. We will see all the answers, probably likely to be difference between Article 25, 26, to what extent it can go, what are all the reasonable restrictions that can be possible.
Yes.
All those things may come up.
Matter is sub judice.
It will come always, sir. I mean, whenever we deliberate in this platform, questions are thrown open for further deliberation. That's the beauty of this platform.
Not only that, some lawyer who is appearing in the Sabrimala review case can take up this and also say that how far it will be helpful for them also.
Yes.
There is a possibility.
I will just explain in hardly a few sentences. Just listen. See, first of all, religion is undefined by the Constitution. Number 2, even if there are judicial definitions, we see Justice Mukherjee defining what is a religion in the Shirurmat case, paragraph 15 of the judgment. Now see, even a judicial definition that is we are incapable of having a precise definition. Right. Now, in the background of the provisions of your Constitution and the light which has been shed by the judicial pronouncements, it can be at its best said that religion means it's a matter of faith. Go back to that preamble then. Liberty. Preamble. So, religion, it's a matter of faith. It's a matter of belief. And it is a particular matter of doctrine. Now, the word religious denomination, take it as religious denomination, because we have that particular word denomination in 16 clause 5 as well as 27. Article 26, that particular word religious denomination, it has to be treated as a single word. And it has to take the color from the word religion, because denomination that is being prefixed by religious. So it has to derive, that denomination has to derive its color from the word religion. If that be so, religious denomination, according to me, I mean, based on these judgments, what I strongly feel is it has to satisfy 3 conditions. Number 1, there should be a collection of individuals. That individual should be having a system of beliefs or doctrine which they regard as conducive to their spiritual well-being. That is what we call a common faith. Number 2 is a common organization. And number 3 is a designation by a distinctive name. That this was considered in Shirurmat. These 3 factors were considered. Now, what is a religion? That again stands defined in another judgment. That Shastri Yajna Purusharji's case of 1966. That's another beautiful judgment which defines what's a religion. Now, kindly see, religious denomination, even according to the Shirurmat case, it really means what you see, a religious sect, a body of having common faith or organization, which I said as designated by a distinctive name. And what very more consideration is Madhavacharya sect, which comes from the Ramanuja sect in that Shirurmat case. Now, Shirurmat was merely one concerning that thing. since then you can see the judicial trend regarding the freedom of religion that evolves through a passage of time till we reach the Sabarimala in terms of the definition as well as the significance. Now you have the Anandamargi case, 84 Supreme Court. Acharya Jagadishwar and Anand, that is an 84 Supreme Court 512. And in Mittal, the court differentiates between what is religion and religious denomination. How? By upholding Shirur Math. By upholding Shirur Math. Now you have the Bijoy Emmanuel case, that what do you call the Yehovah's. Yehovah's. Can you say that even that said it is protected by Article 25? Then you have the Church of God's case, 2000, AR 2000 Supreme Court 2073, which again Article 25 and 26 were considered. You have the Aruna Roy's case, 2002. See, judiciary has decided everything following the set of precedents which followed right from 54, following that 7-judge benchmark. Now, there is a clear-cut difference between a religious, religious denomination and a religious section. I think that there is absolutely nothing what we call, neither can Article 25 overlap Article 26 or vice versa. Why? Because fundamental right, of course, fundamental right they have in their own fields and each one embraces the other. I don't think in my limited knowledge that anything runs to the contra. Now, I am subject to correction. Now, this is what I have to say about that.
Yes. Any other question?
Regarding Shyam pointed out that right.
No, we will reserve it to some other occasion.
Okay. That of course.
That'll be better.
Yeah,
Anyway,
okay. Anyway, we'll have a.
In fact, wonderful. I think Vipin. Yeah.
Sir, Justice Bhati sir, just your views on the aspect, the question which I am putting, that is post-COVID era, what all extensions of Article 21 can we expect?
Probably force majeure is going to be one big thing because we will have to realize that there will be a lot of defaults not only in economic transactions or contractual obligations, but to my mind, the biggest impact that the framework of law is likely to face, or the law fraternity is likely to face, is that in the given circumstances when the pandemic paralyzed the world, there are very many things which will occur which will be a result of non-performance and non-productivity and the paralysis that we went through. So we as law fraternity have to deal with those things while keeping in, on one side we have to be sympathetical to the suffrage that has happened to the population, and on the other side the apparatus, for example, like we saw that Delhi High Court judgment in which this PIL was filed that the tenant should not be made to pay the rent. So the Hon'ble Delhi High Court has said that the landlord is not before us, and whatever landlord also may be surviving only on the basis of that rent. So that will be the sole criteria. So similarly, what I feel is that a lot of disputes pertaining to the paralysis in the society would be there. And I'm sure as law fraternity will be able to rise up to the occasion to provide adequate relief to the parties.
Unmute, please.
Okay. Sir, regarding the extension of Article 21, which all fields could be brought under the Article 21? Because I feel that now the people will claim that right to health would be to free medical aid should be made a fundamental right in the light of this pandemic.
In Rajasthan, Vipinji, already the right to medical health is free because the medicines are being given free by the state, and hospitalization and everything is free in the government hospitals. And probably medical and health has always been, but yes, you are right to that extent that the development of medical and health to be a more robust system and a more a system which would be more capable of taking care of the population at large in such circumstances ought to be developed, and this is one spectrum which has to be really worked upon, and Article 21 will definitely help us to do this in this direction.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Wonderful. Pandemic could be equated to a state priority, and could not a citizen rely on 21 and say that the state should be more proactive and should have taken more responsibility, something like that. That I think what Vipin was alluding to.
I think, sir, both of you are right. Vipinji was right, because ultimately what is happening is that it is an unprecedented situation. We are not having norms or regulations or law, though we have that Pandemic Act which is there 100 years old. But the proposition of locking down and the proposition of closing down to this magnitude to the present day civilization is something which is unique. So probably we need to, I mean, say, sort of chronicleize it, and we need to put it into, I mean, some good substance, that we can also improve our laws regarding this in future if some situation arises, how to deal with it. And both of you are right that, like, for example, migrant situation, it was a pathetic situation, which the country itself was feeling bad about it. So, and so many other failures and so many other some aspects of unemployment, right to livelihood will be a big issue, because already we have seen that permanent employment has reduced and contractual employment has substituted the permanent employment to a very large extent. So all these kinds of right to livelihood situation, right to life, right to have food, everything will be under the scrutiny of the three organs. And there is no doubt about it that for the larger benefit of the common citizen, we all need to stand together and try to upgrade our facilities and upgrade our situation so that we can provide more relief to the last corner of this population.
So, I think we have Shabina Raj with a question. Shabina, please unmute yourself. So I just unmute everybody so that this technical hitch could be.
Please.
Shabina, now you can unmute yourself. Sir, you can also unmute, because when I do that, it's a general command. So, yeah. Rangkumar sir, you can unmute.
Yes, now.
Shabina, please unmute yourself and put the question. Are you there? You put that hand icon, that's why I'm putting the question to you. Anyway, that's it. Sir, anyway, sir, you will be traveling with us in this journey. We hope and wish that we'll be sending you the flyers regularly, and whenever time permits, sir, do join us, because we would like to have you in this platform.
I wanted to speak a lot on 9th schedule and other also, but then I thought that it would be injustice if we try to finish off. So we have probably consolidated it well, but we'll continue to speak some other time again in some vacation.
Audio.
Yep, absolutely, sir.
No, this is Pushpendra Singh. I have got some.
Please.
Doubt. Actually, my doubt, because I am not a constitutional expert.
Yes, sir.
See,
Yes, sir.
I have been thinking that the reason for most of the innumerable conflicting and confusing judgments of the Supreme Court on Article 22 is mainly because Clause 5 of Article 22, though gives a right of representation, it does not indicate the authority to which that representation is to be given. I have come across decisions which say that it can be to the detaining authority, it can be to the appropriate government, it can be to the advisory board. With the result, one representation given to the government not disposed of, order is set aside. One government given to the advisory board not disposed of, order is set aside. One government given to the appropriate government or the detaining authority, order is set aside. Whereas in Kerala, we have the Kerala Anti-Social Activities Prevention Act, which specifically says the representation shall be addressed to the government. But even there, some rulings of under the COFEPOS are to say that a representation given to the advisory board was not disposed of, so order is bad. would it not be better if the framers of the constitution had indicated the authority to whom the representation is to be made? I am only thinking aloud.
Probably you're right, sir. And there is no question of, any ambiguity left has to be removed. But the probable reason why this confusion arose was that these were different set of laws, where even the nomenclature and the cadre of the authorities were slightly different. It is the same problem, sir, like which we were just conversing when we were speaking pre-session. You had raised a very pertinent proposition that the police authority need not be restricted to the police only. It has to be restricted, it has to be taken ahead. And it has to be, all parallel bodies who are doing the investigation, or customs or any other organization who is doing it, they have to be brought at par with a provision of section, for the purpose of section 167 and other protective measures. Similarly, in this question, this also, sir, you are absolutely right, that if there is a consolidation, then it will be more helpful for a citizen. A citizen would know exactly how to redress himself, and it will be helpful to the lawyer community and us also to understand that this was the authority which has applied its mind. If the
Exactly. Even though the right of representation is given, the authority to whom the representation is to be given is not indicated.
You are absolutely right, sir. I totally agree with you that these are the fields where we really need to work upon, and I'm sure we all will together.
So, sir, this brings us to the end of the 61st session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. Sir, 2 days you are with us. As a matter of fact, you are now family. You cannot just escape from us. So, this platform is always open anytime. Whenever you feel free, sir, do drop in. We are deeply indebted to you for your wonderful presentation in a very, very simple manner of part 3 of the Indian Constitution in 2 days, yesterday and today. I'm conscious of the fact that the time was very limited, but still, you were able to touch upon those aspects which were very, very important. Yes, Ramshad, you want to ask something?
Yes, sir. Yes. Sir, within very short time, we got very clear picture of the part 3 of Constitution. And just before some time, Nagamuthu sir asking some very specious doubt.
I saw your comment that the Muslim law, modern law, has an answer for that. I saw your comment at the bottom.
Yes, sir. That comment is delivered by some Tuhfa and Minhaj. That's a Arabic jurisprudence that I will translate to English. Then I will.
For transgender, it will be good for transgenders.
Yeah.
I saw your comment. I was trying to see
yes,
that.
Yes,
sir. Please go ahead. Please explain in short so that.
Sure, sir. Because of the after the death of one person, one of the legal hands of that deceased person is a third gender. The main part is in our world is one is men, then second is woman. That is the main part. This third gender means the both sexual kinds will be shown in that person.
Hermaphrodite.
Yeah, hermaphrodite. Then after the death of the deceased person, the share will give to the clear picture of the pupil. Means woman and men. Then the third gender, it's Arabic called khunsa. For that person, the share will give the lower share. Means who will get the lower share because in Muslim law, the men and women, the daughter and son will treated as a two daughter. Means if we get the son, the double share of the daughter, then that half share will give to this third gender person. Then up to proportionate to the bigger share, that share will keep as a reserve. When this person cleared the gender of this person after some years,
if we clear that this is a man, not a woman.
Ramshad,
Then,
I'm sorry to cut you short. Can I just ask you one thing?
yes, sir.
Does whatever you are saying, does it recognize a transgender, or you want that the transgender to either exhibit male or female attributes to get what do you call the bounty or
Full share. Full share.
whatever it is, sir. I mean, do you recognize a third gender, or you want the third gender to come up with either a male or a female affinity to get this? Then
Absolutely, sir. Because the third gender is
is the third gender recognized? First answer me that, please, Ramshad, so that we can go further. Like
recognition of the third gender is not possible in Islam.
Then there is no question of any explanation. Then you are saying that the third gender should come forward and say either I am a male or a female. Then what is the fun in the Supreme Court judgment? See, the Supreme Court judgment said that we recognize a third gender. Does the existing law of interstate succession in the country recognize a third gender or not? What Justice Nagamuthu sir put forward. That is something to be contemplated. Your explanation is, I fully understand. Last time also we had a discussion. That's why I'm coming straight to that. You said that this person either will have to opt for X party or Y party and then get it. No. Why can't I be a party?
Law contemplates only son and daughter.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
This is neither son nor daughter.
Yeah, that's what I said. If Ramshad has got an explanation in whatever religion or whatever explanation that a transgender has been recognized as an individual entity entitled to get a share on his own legs, in not being a male or a female. If there is anything like that, of course, Ramshad, we are open to hear anything on that.
And more than that,
the statute law recognizes only male or female.
Yeah, and more Ramshad, you have to understand one more thing. See, you have been reading from the Arabic version. Kindly go and read the Shairobanu decision. It contains 284 paragraphs. Read all the 284 paragraphs. You can see that the first dissenting judgment is by the 2 judges, and the 3 judges who go for the majority. Your Application Act of 37 itself, it has become obsolete. It doesn't stand the test of law. It doesn't stand up. See, Article 13, Clause 2 directly stays at you. The entire application of the Shariat Act is gone. Just go and see.
Ramshad, the issue is that we are facing a challenge now, in the sense we got an entirely new scenario which has to be harmoniously constructed or construed or interpreted with the existing law. How do we do that? We are thinking of that.
On the finishing end, dear young friend Ramshad, yes, and all of this. This was one case we were dealing with. This. What happened? Rajasthan High Court was, now it is no more dealing, so we are free to talk about it. The case, this boy, this person who got selected as a police constable. You see it as a judgment is there. It is of Honorable Justice Dinesh Mehta, one of our colleagues. So the judgment was, this person was trying to, he participated in the constable recruitment, and he said that the option in the form was only male and female. And he said he qualified it. He qualified it as a male.
You call him
he called himself he, as Ram sir is rightly pointing it out, and he qualified it. Now he says, once I am physically qualified, once I am meritoriously, I am on merit, then give me appointment. So the state said there is no question of giving appointment. So this court has said that how, if he is qualified on all terms and he is a human being, you recognize it, then give the appointment. I don't know what has happened in Supreme Court, but these are things which will. That is why all these questions which are being deliberated upon Premji and upon other speakers, including Shyamji and all, they all are, and Ram sir also, that they are all projecting the future, that we'll have to deal with these things. It is these laws, they have come to a place, but we will need to go further. We'll need to deliberate further how far we can take them. Tomorrow, a bar council will register them or not. Tomorrow, we will accept them in judicial service or not. Tomorrow we will accept them to become ministers or not. So
no, I think now this has been settled. I think that in most of the cases, I think there's transcendental judicial service in Tamil Nadu, it appears.
Yes.
She has been selected, and in police service also that somebody was selected. And
judgment is in their favor. The judgment is in their favor. The judgment
So what they say is,
So far
you
as
can,
Tamil
when the Supreme Court says there is a gender, another gender is there. Instead of male, female, you will have to put that option must be given to the other person also to say I belong to this.
Like Nota.
Brother, may I say one thing? Mr. Shyam,
No, as regards the succession is concerned, I think there requires some amendment in the Hindu Succession Act
in most of the laws,
to plug them in some category. Plug them in some category to provide a rights.
Let's
Mr.
see how
Shyam,
it happens.
Mr.
Yes,
Shyam,
sir.
please permit me.
Yeah.
So, so far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, what happened was a girl who studied in the girls' school, then pursued her education in the girls' college, then got selected as a woman police constable. Then during training, she was sent for some kind of medical examination. Certificate came that she had one Y chromosome, which makes the difference. They said that you are a transgender and discharged her from duty. She filed a writ petition. That was the first case which I decided when I was sitting here. I said that she still claimed to be a woman only. She wants her identity to be a woman. So I said that restore her in service. So that is a position. Now, after that, much development has been made in Tamil Nadu by Madras High Court. Transgenders have been recognized and they have been appointed as sub-inspectors also as per the, in pursuance of the order of the High Court. Transgender is a sub-inspector today. Yeah.
Very good, sir. Very good.
What is their prospect in marriage market?
Ramkumar, sir, that will contemplate at that time. I think we'll take one question before.
We are not in the market. We are not in the market.
Tomorrow's random law.
Sir, we'll take final question before we wind up. That is Manohar Lal Solanki. Please, Manohar Lal, let's put the question. You put your hand, sir.
Yes, yes, definitely. Most welcome. Yes, Manoj.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes. We can hear you.
It was a really good lecture, and it was really good to hear all of you, sir. And I don't have a question, but I would like to be part of this group, so I could acquire more legal knowledge.
Appreciation.
Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful, Manohar. That is very kind of you. And so let me do the winding up session in the sense like 61st session.
No, it is rewinding. No, it is not winding.
Sir, it is a continuing journey. We just reached the train goes on, but station wherein I'll have to permit everybody to have the refreshments and things like that so that we can reassemble tomorrow, so that we can share the random thoughts of one of the eminent speakers around Ramkumar sir on criminal law tomorrow. So tomorrow we have Justice V. Ramkumar sir sharing his random thoughts on criminal law, and we'll all be part of that. And with our stray knowledge and stray thoughts, we'll just come in, sir, definitely with our questions. So till then, I would say that it was a wonderful experience today. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being part of this journey. Wonderful interactive session. So tomorrow, 3:30. Till then, please take care and stay safe. Thank you.